hello again, good afternoon, and we are, welcome again to this next session of our webinar on cultural participation and local resilience, strategies for the recovery. So now we will speak about the impact of cultural participation on inclusion. And once again, we designed these sessions so that we first hear what is the evidence there. Are there any causal effects, and what do data tell us about the impacts of participating in different cultural activities and inclusion? With this short introduction, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Maciej Hoffman, our partner in this series of policy webinars from the European Commission, DG Education and Culture. Maciej, please, the control is yours now.
Thank you very much, Katia, for this introduction. I hope you can see me and hear me well. I'm very pleased to be here with you, and I'm also very excited to see that quite a lot of participants are here. It's been a very busy day for all of us. With a lot of course, exciting discussions and exchanges. So we still have this one session ahead, and I hope we'll also make it exciting for you. We have a great lineup of speakers, but before I go into presenting them very briefly on where I come from, as said by Katia, we are partnering with OECD with this webinar and the series of webinars that are also going to follow next year to bring you this project, to also look at how culture can contribute to local development, to regional development, how it can link to social inclusion and social cohesion. We're looking at data, we're looking at how we can make our policies based on evidence, based on data. We also want to help local authorities to learn from each other. So again, with this in mind, I'm very excited to present to you our four speakers that we'll hear from. As Katia said, indeed, first of all, we are going to hear from the, I would say, more research and academia side, but it would not be entirely true to say so, because both of our first speakers, Professor Pierluigi Sacco and Professor Luis Bonet, are, of course, they are very distinguished academia and research professionals. But both of them are also very much, they have a lot of experience with linking to very specific cultural policies and elaborating them. Speaking, of course, of Pierluigi Sacco, I'm also very happy to see him again after seeing him last week at another event we were co-organizing together with Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union and with member states, discussing topics that are very close actually to our discussions here, precisely on how culture can contribute to social cohesion and social inclusion. So Pierluigi, I'm very happy to see you, and Pierluigi has been a long-time contributor to many of our reflections in the European Commission, to in 2018, for instance, with the European Year of Cultural Heritage, but of course, also before this. I'm very happy to see him as well, and to see that he's also providing this personal bridge between these two words of the Commission reflections and the OECD. And as far as Luis is concerned, I'm also very excited and looking forward to hear your contributions. I know that you also have a very extensive experience with a number of European Union projects. Some of them are also being presented at this event. You have been also a very important part of NCAC network that we work very closely with in the European Commission. So I'm very excited to have you here. And then last but not least, our two other participants, Kyoto Mihawski, who also wears a number of different hats because he's managing a micro-art center. He's coordinating the cultural division of the municipality of Wrocław, which was the European Capital of Culture in 2016. And this is why he will have to excuse himself around 5 o'clock to leave us. But before he does it, he will still be able to share with us a number of interesting examples and practical, I would say, dimension of how cultural participation and inclusion can work together on the local level. He has a very important hat too as a board member and important contributor to the European Network of Cultural Centers that represents over 500 cultural centers across Europe. So very welcome to you, Piotr, looking forward. Last but not least, Ingrid Bosmans, Artistic Director at Museum Hof van Boesleide in Mechelen in Belgium, which I read is actually sometimes called the Flanders' last humanist city palace. So we're also very much looking forward to hear your inspiring example from Mechelen, and we're looking forward to see how we can also discuss the specific examples, speak about specific challenges that you have, and somehow have this very exciting exchanges between all of us. So without further ado, I would like to dive deep into our topic as promised, and turn now to both Luis and Pierluigi for our first question. As Katja said, we want to discuss how do we look at the evidence of the impacts of cultural participation on inclusion? What can we see here as patterns? What do we know about it? So I suggest we start with Luis. Maybe Luis, if you will have some questions specifically to Pierluigi, then you can also add them in your intervention, and then we can have a bit of ping pong between you two as well. Yes. So please, Luis, the screen is yours.
Oh, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to take part of this event. So for me, it's very appealing. So thanks. And to have this possibility to talk with all of you, and I think it's a learning experience. So the first issue from my side is that the two concepts, inclusion/exclusion, because of course we can talk about only inclusion, but as well exclusion, and the other concept, which is cultural participation, both are ambiguous concepts, are in a way polysemic words, have many different meanings. So when we talk about cultural participation, we can talk mainly about 4 different things. The first thing is the access or the attendance to cultural activities. This is an easy issue. But there are other aspects of cultural participation, like individual citizens' cultural practices, so creation, training, these are other kind of issues, or community participation. So the fact of belonging to a cultural group has another kind of participation value. And finally, the idea of participation in the public decision-making and in the governance of cultural practices and cultural organizations. I think we have to separate these 4 concepts because they are not exactly the same. And inequality happens a little bit the same issue, because the concept inequality, it is a complex issue, because it means that we can talk about socioeconomic inequality, we can talk about gender inequality, we can talk about territorial inequality. So, and equity is as well a very important concept, which is not automatically linked to equality or inequality, because equity is another issue. It means that we can be equal, but we are not in the same position. And that is very important. So people with very different cultural background or educational background, or even having problems because they live far away in a rural area, or because they live in a poor neighborhood where the size of the apartments are very small, that there are very busy places that it is difficult to take part as an individual, because you are in this social kind of context. So these concepts have to be analyzed in a very particular context. And of course, we know that, and we need to give answers to our policy makers, the people that in the cities tries to push better and higher cultural participation and try to battle against inequalities. So that is, as a beginning, the first thing that we have to share about. So what do we understand about these 2 topics? And what is the goal that public authorities, people who tries to push and to design public policies, try to do in relation to increasing and incentivizing cultural participation? Because there is another issue, which is people have different needs, different values, and we can impose our idea of the legitimate culture, because what is legitimate or non-legitimate culture? So is going to the theater a better kind of cultural participation than, for instance, taking part of a craft event or a folk activity? I don't think we can say there is a better option. So we have to accept that our societies are plural, with very different expectations, needs, even though the research we did in some different places shows that in Europe, mainly we share the basic values of culture. And that is very curious, that even though the practices are unequal, the values are quite similar.
Thank you very much, Luis.
Starting point.
I think it's a very good starting point indeed, and there's a lot to that you've already touched upon that I think we'll get back to. Yeah, so I will now turn to Pierluigi if you want to complement, add anything. A very specific question I would have also possibly to both of you is about research gaps that exist. So Luis also told us about what we know, but what is that we don't know? This is of course very relevant on the Commission side because we are now in the process of designing the future program. So we are of course looking into future opportunities under Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Program of the European Union to see if there are any specific hooks for future research opportunities and topics we should actually address. So Pierluigi, now to you, if you would like to complement what Luis said, maybe turn certain things around and share with us your reflections. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Massey. Well, of course, I totally share the viewpoint of Luis that we are facing ambiguous concepts. So the biggest challenge is, first of all, to make sense of these particular concepts, for example, in scientific ways. There are some areas of research that have, I think, explored some aspect and also, in some sense, help us understand what we don't know yet. Also because most of this research has not really developed as a research on the specific social cohesion implications of culture, but has more been related to the curiosity of how culture related to, let's say, specific domains of a human cognition or a human sociability. So the big effort in the first place is to build a conceptual framework that can unify this research within a unique, let's say, conceptual perspective that can help us understand also where are the gaps. I would very briefly consider 5 areas that have been particularly relevant to us. The first is the area of social cognition. There is clearly a very strong relationship between certain forms of cultural participation and experience and how we understand others. From this point of view, for example, there's been very important research on how reading fiction and novels help us improve mind reading of others, by mind reading implying developing a theory of mind of what are the intentions of other people, or what are the motivations of other people, what are the beliefs of other people, moving upper and upper in the ladder in terms of complexity and difficulty of deciphering. So from this point of view, there is some encouraging evidence. There was for a while some dispute about whether or not these effects were relevant, but now it seems that there is an established consensus in this regard. But think, for example, from the social cognition point of view of the role of theater. We know that, for example, theater has been extremely important to help, for example, young people develop theory of minds, because it's really about getting in and out of the character, which is exactly what we need. In some sense, when we understand others, we also have to consider that the notion of person as the origin in ancient Greek theater, because in some sense, the notion of personality as we know it today was related to the theatrical character and how this theatrical character was embodying a certain type of moral principle. Before that, the notion of person as we know it today was not completely developed. So clearly there is this connection. The second one is what we could call social connectedness in itself. Because of course, social cohesion is also about being able to relate to others. And something that we have learned is that, of course, relating to others is something that requires some special ability. Think, for example, of the importance of listening to others, things that are crucial, for example, for social cohesion. But for many people, listening to something that does not represent their own ideas is sometimes irritating or even disappointing. So something that culture does very well, from this point of view, is to create a space of attention, a space of listening. And again, think, for example, of participatory community arts. I mean, this is really a field in which people are learning to cope with different opinions to arrive at a shared consensus, to a common action. And again, from this point of view, for example, the visual arts have been extremely powerful training, let's say, communities, not necessarily from a paternalistic point of view, but really enabling this community to pursue jointly objectives that they found meaningful. A third area is cultural diversity, which clearly is crucial. I mean, probably in the next Horizon Europe, this will be one of the pillars. How do we address, for example, the migrant crisis, and how do we capitalize on our appreciation of cultural diversity rather than seeing it as a threat? What is the problem of cultural diversity? Again, it's a problem of cognition, because I simply don't understand why certain people behave in a certain way. Just because, for example, I pat people on the back, and then somebody from Japan arrives and is or she is absolutely irritated by the idea that I can pat on the back of a stranger. But I say, why? I mean, I was so friendly. So the real point is that these translation problems happen all the time. And for many of us, this simply means that if the translation goes wrong, this means that the other person is crazy, is a psycho, or simply doesn't understand humor or whatever it is. We have to learn again what are the skills that are needed to make this bridge. And again, what culture does is putting ourselves in the face of constant experiences of what we could call cultural estrangement, situations in which we don't orientate ourselves. Again, think of, let's say, an experimental theater play or a contemporary art exhibition with installations that for most people are very, very difficult to appreciate if they don't have some supporting, for example, knowledge to make sense of what's there. Again, this kind of experience and coping with the frustration of not understanding, but also at the same time being curious about developing the skills that are needed to understand is something that can be exercised in a very low risk environment in cultural experiences and can be translated very powerfully, for example, in real intercultural dialogue, also when this is high stakes. And then there is, of course, the issue of empathy and more generally pro-social emotions. Empathy, it's a strange concept, which has the pros and cons, because the notion of empathy is not univocally good, because empathizing with somebody could also be projecting my own beliefs about somebody into somebody that not necessarily is what the other people feel. So, however, certainly empathy and pro-social emotions are extremely important, and they need to be developed. And again, if we think again of Greek theater, I mean, if we really have a laboratory where our culture learned about how emotions are made and how they can be manifested and how they can be understood, not simply conceptually, but especially, and that's the point, in some sense, biologically, how we react to emotions. This is a field in which this is so apparent that I don't need to comment further. And finally, self-worth. One crucial aspect of cultural participation is that it makes people feel special, not in the cheesy way, but in the sense of being able to think of myself as somebody who, in some sense, is worth investing on, as myself, for example. Think, for example, of all the issues of school dropout. School dropout is generally related to dysfunctional family situations in which people, young children, for example, are not cared about enough. And so they simply don't think it's worth studying because they are worth nothing. Think, for example, of some programs like El Sistema, so the musical education, classical music education, which had a fantastic effect in dysfunctional neighborhoods, for example, in South America, not just in training good musicians, which it did, but in redeeming an enormous amount of young people back into school, because they regained a sense of self-worth that they had completely lost. So these are areas in which the relationship between cultural and social cohesion is promising. But what is the point? The point is that all these areas have a very fragmentary coverage, because in none of these areas there has been a systematic research that was really targeting the issue of cultural participation. They were just like, let's say, side results. It's like we are taking advantage of a research program that emerged for completely different reasons, and we extrapolate from there something that is useful to us. So what is missing? What is missing is a coherent research program on this. and especially how, for example, capitalizing on the preliminary evidence that we have built in these 5 areas, we can build again, a systematic, a strategic approach to cultural and social cohesion that has the advantage to have already a solid ground, but that needs to be systematized, and especially that needs specific research design that goes in this direction.
Thank you very much, Pierluigi. You know, it was on the one hand a deep dive, so there's again quite a lot of topics you've tackled, but at the same time, I quite liked your idea of 5 points and something that gives us food for thought also as policymakers. And I know quite a lot of Commission colleagues are actually listening to us because I looked at the list of participants. So I'm also very excited that they're able to hear insights. Before we move on, I still wanted to ask you one more thing, which is maybe in a way very mundane and very boring for some people, but very important, of course, from the side of policymakers. So namely the indicators. How do you measure the effectiveness of cultural policies when it comes to social inclusion? This is something on which we're, of course, currently reflecting in the Commission too with the new programs. I would like Luis to maybe ask you to briefly reflect on that, and then we'll move on, but there will still be time for you to go back to this as well, Pierluigi.
Just before talking about indicators, I want to add something to what Pierluigi said. I think the role of mediation, I think we need to do research in the ways we do mediation. It's really crucial because it is linked to what Pierluigi said about empathy, creating empathy. And I think this is really, we will go, artificial intelligence will help us a lot in many ways, but there are some things which the human being as a mediator between practices, creation, belief, ways of creating innovation, avant-garde, etc. I think this is a very, very crucial issue that we need to do much more research and interdisciplinary research. We need the approach from the psychological area, for the cognitive area, but as well from the social and anthropological dimensions of that, because everything is linked. So just it was an adding thing to what Pierluigi said. In relation to indicators, well, this is always one of the big issues and challenges because, and we are working on that in a joint project that Pierluigi is also taking part, is the MESOC project, is an Horizon 2020 project that we are working on the social impact of culture. The issue is, indicators have to be linked to the analysis of the context. Without the qualitative approach of the context, we can't use correctly the different indicators. That's one thing. The second thing is that, in general, we build indicators through clear goals and outcomes. If try to measure the achievement or not achievement of these outcomes and these goals. And the problem in many cases is that these outcomes and these goals are not enough well defined, or are defined from a preconceptual point of view. So there is not a critical approach who breaks the conventions. And we need to break the conventions in order to build better indicators, because one of the problems, very common problems with indicators, is that when people know the indicators, they do things in order to achieve these indicators, not to achieve the real goal which is behind this indicator. So this is always one of the problems on evaluation or on assessment, especially in public policies. So we need indicators who have to be in the same way comparable, because we need to compare our situation to other situation in a specific context, take into account the difficulties and the instrumentalization of the process by the different players. And finally, in a moment that we have gaps in the data, in the analogical time, when goods and services follows an analogical process, it was quite easy to get information. Today, the most relevant information is in the hand of the digital platforms. And these digital platforms don't share with us the most relevant information, because information is power. And for the other hand, we have the problem that we try to protect personal data. This is really good from the point of view of citizens, but from the point of view of researchers is an extra challenge. So how we protect personal data, we get data in order to build better policies, and at the same time, we receive every day advertising and other kinds of information that we don't want, and because they are very competent in the way to go through the legislation. So most of the people don't know how to protect themselves from the kind of information they don't want to receive. So this is really a big challenge, and I don't have an answer. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Luis. I don't think we are going to have, very precise answers at this seminar, but our goal is to keep on trying in these. So I wanted to link to your last point here, actually, and go to the second issues I wanted to tackle with you, namely the question of access to culture via digital means and digital infrastructure. This is something that Pierluigi also hinted at during the previous session. There was also some of the questions on that in the Q&A. And by the way, I also encourage all of the participants, if you have specific comments or questions at this stage, please use the Q&A box in Zoom to ask these questions. I will try to pick up on them later. So going back to the question of digital infrastructure, Pierluigi, what would you say about it? On the one hand, of course, we can look at new technologies and think at ways in which it can help to combat exclusion, but we can, of course, look at double-edged sword. So we can also see ways in which this digital access can actually make inequalities worse. So which one is it for you? And how actually does COVID-19 add into this broader picture?
Yeah, if I can, I take the first minute just to add some comment on the indicator side, because it was too tempting not to respond, but then I will quickly go to this. We'll be brief. I am a really becoming a big fan of psychometric indicators. We have fantastic work being developed by social psychologists, cognitive psychologists in this regard. And I think that one thing that the European Commission could really promote in this regard is really an interdisciplinary forum on cultural participation and social inclusion between the psychological and behavioral sciences and the social sciences, because this is really something that is missing, but we have all the pieces together. We simply have to combine them. And from the point of view of digital platforms and big data, which brings me to your question, we have a wealth, the real wealth of information, as Luis was saying, is now in the hands of the private providers of digital platforms. Just to give you an example, I'm working now on a project on infodemics, a project on the creation and diffusion of fake news through the internet. We were able to, with our research group, we were able to make a deal with Twitter and to have a real insight into the data stream of Twitter. We were able to build in 1 month risk indicators for the whole world. And we are basically created from scratch a natural experiment during the various phases of the pandemic. This kind of thing, which could have been science fiction, let's say 3 years ago, now is entirely normal. But in the specific cultural field, we have no entry point in this regard. So the real possibility to start a dialogue with the big platforms would be, I think, interesting for them as well. But for us, it would be a game changer. We could start thinking of cultural participation and the social impact or the well-being impact in a completely different way. So I really urge, in the sense, to put at the top of the agenda, starting a serious conversation with these platforms, because this would really help us, in some sense, to have another game. And specifically then, also, of course, in terms of the consequences for digital participation. You're right, Masei. I mean, it can be either way. It's a double-edged sword. But what I think is that, first of all, we have still to learn what digital technology is. I mean, 10 years, 15 years is nothing compared with this with, let's say, early cinema. Would you seriously say that 15 years after the invention and diffusion of cinema, we were able to understand what were the social consequences of cinema or how to use it? Of course not. This is even more complicated. So we are at the beginning of the learning curve. This, first of all, I am absolutely skeptical about all this doomsday, let's say, fears about destruction of sociality due to the digital. humans have been able to develop sophisticated sociality in the most unlikely settings. So digital is not particularly challenging in this regard. It even offers a lot of extra possibilities. So I'm absolutely optimistic. The real point is, as you correctly pointed out, conditions of access. So the problem is quality of connectivity. The problem is the economic barrier to, let's say, the capability building. There was even an editorial on science that proposed, in this case, it was the Pontifical Committee for Social Sciences, so Vatican City, but they were proposing on science, why don't we create a new human right in digital connectivity and access? Because without this today, you cannot be a full citizen in some sense. So this, I think, is the serious issue. How can we remove the barriers? Once we do this, I think we can be confident in the capacity of people to use these new possibilities in a very ingenious way, and also in a very inclusive way. But, and this is my last word, if this world is completely controlled only by profit maximizing private providers, of course, you can have only one type, let's say, of forum, one type of square, let's say, to create conversations. And probably the kind of fora, the kind of squares that we want are not, I mean, disconnected from those, but probably are not exhaustive from those. Probably we need to create a new type of forum, which is closer to the public interest, close to inclusion and capability building, as a complement of what already exists in the for-profit side.
And I want
Thank
to
you
say
very much.
something more.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead, Luis.
Because I was invited last year to the PhD doctoral summer school in China, and it was on cultural industries students. And it was amazing how the Chinese government were bringing them really very good data which is not allowed here. And of course, using it for very particular purposes, but they understand much better than us many things because they were able to use this data in order to develop research. So in a way, understanding that the Communist Party in China is doing that for very particular interest, in any case, the academic world there have access to this data and are developing quite interesting developments. And I think we need to dialogue with them in order to understand that, of course, using our Western values and our Western understanding of culture and freedom, but we need to have a dialogue because they are advancing quite fast.
Thank you very much, Luis. I'm also tempted to ask you, are you equally optimistic as Pierluigi when it comes to technological development? What's your take on this?
Of course, I agree with Pierluigi in the sense that in the history of humanity have been much more stressing moments. So in this way, I'm optimistic. I think digitalization, when you see real low-income people using their mobile telephones in a very smart way, they can, of course, it's not the same to have your portable, a tablet, everyone in a family having everything, or having only a mobile telephone. But in any case, we can see a lot of very interesting development. The issue, the important issue, is how we bring them critical capacity in order to be ahead of the impositions coming from the commercial world or from populist movements, which are the big dangers.
Thank you very much, Luis. I would also very much like to see both of you and Pierluigi, disagreeing on something. So I don't know if we can get you to do that. What I would like to move on now, because of course this joint project between OECD and the European Commission has a very important role of peer learning and exchanging, let's say, speaking quite frankly again about challenges on the local level and looking at how we can better advise local policymakers to again make better policies, to, in this case, for instance, find good ways to foster these links between cultural participation and inclusion. So I would like to ask you, I don't know which one of you would like to start, but maybe if you could give an idea of 3 things that cities and regions should keep in mind actually to make these important links between cultural participation and inclusion and put it in place. Maybe we'll start with Pierluigi. I don't know if we can get you to disagree again, but if there is something you think your counterpart could have problems with, then please put it on the table for our discussion to to see some, let's say, fight between you two.
Well, it's difficult because disclosure. I am very much close friends with Luis, and we've been, speaking together on these issues and reasoning together for such a long time that, in some sense, we are spontaneously aligning on so many things. But in this specific area, I think that one very important issue is public space. We have to redefine and we have to rediscover public space in cities, and especially notions from cultural geography. The right to the city notion, for example, put forward by Henri Lefebvre, one of the most important geographers of the 20th century, is extremely important because in principle, everybody can go everywhere in the public space, but this is not true. And the public space is really the place where you have the real difference, because if you think, for example, of the huge issue that there is between people who live in the neighborhoods and people who live downtown, in terms of the use of public space, of the use of the services of the city. If you think, for example, of films like, for example, Matteo Kassovitz, and this very, very vivid and dramatic representation of how angry, for example, people from the neighborhoods are with respect to people who live downtown in terms of the real access to the real opportunities in the public space. There is in some sense, a creep in social conflict in terms of how we are enabled to use public space. It's extremely important to think of social cohesion also in terms of community projects in the public space in which we do not exploit, in some sense, communities from the point of view of legitimizing ourselves, for example, by paternalistic involving minorities, or just in some sense, let's say, like performing as if we are including, but with a script that we have already decided beforehand. It's very much about experimenting with co-creation from the bottom up. I know that this kind of terminology is fashionable, so I'm not using this because it's fashionable, but because I want to commit to a serious development in this regard. And this is very challenging, and there are so many projects that are done badly in this particular regard. It's also very important to analyze why, in some cases, this doesn't work. But I think that from the point of view of cities, I think that the public space is the new frontier, not only for the city hall, but also for the museum, also for the theater. Because if you really want to create a new dialogue, if you want to build a new trust, for example, with the people who never go to the theater or never go to the museum, you cannot simply have more marketing boost to bring them in. You have to go there where they are, and you have created a new dialogue. This is where trust is built. And then, of course, you can invite them back.
Thank you very much, Pierluigi. Luis, I would like to turn to you now, and already making a bit of a go ahead for the speakers that will follow. I would like to ask you the same question, but also maybe if you could look at it from the angle of possibly non-urban areas, so also the rural areas, peri-urban areas, and not only essentially very, let's say, city-centric perspective. What would be your recommendations for local policymakers and local actors, of course, as well?
Very funny, because I was thinking on the relationship between culture and nature, and how this pandemic issue is bringing us to the nature again, the importance of being in contact with the nature. And there is a movement going outside the city. I was this morning in another European project, Creative Europe project. The name is Stronger Peripheries. And it was very interesting to see festivals and theaters from different parts of the peripheries of Europe having very strong capacity, avant-garde vision. So we have strong peripheries everywhere, and we have to analyze them. And we have to analyze them because I think we need to connect the cities with the countryside. The whole idea of urban and rural is over. We need to rethink this, and I think this is a really very important issue. Another very important issue, it is how we rethink positive discrimination. When I was talking before about the difference between inequality and inequity, of course, the traditional way to solve this issue is about using positive discrimination strategies. But these are sometimes a little bit dangerous in the sense that you can create protected kind of people, but inequalities exist. So we need to rethink and do research on the effect, the long-term effect, and the short-term strategies in relation to this. So these are a couple of ideas that I think that we can develop. And of course, I think that we have to incorporate small cities, medium-sized, regional. So we need to create a system that not only the powerful, the well-connected people, but to create hubs in order to give voices to the people who have different experiences, different visions, but this is the richness of Europe and the richness of the European culture.
Thank you very much, Luis. That's I think also a great opening for our next speaker. Thank you both of you, Pierluigi, and thank you very much, Luis, for your contributions. We'll be getting back to you after hearing from two upcoming speakers. In the meantime, I also would like to encourage all the participants to ask questions, because we are going to pick up on these later on. With this opening, I would like to give the floor to Piotr, who I'm sure is quite impatient to share with us, given his many actually hats that I already mentioned, some of the examples he might have actually in relation to cultural participation and social inclusion, possibly also from this angle of non-urban areas. So please, Piotr, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Maciej. Thank you all, Louis and Pierluigi, for your very inspiring thoughts and opening, let's say, a background philosophical approaches. I was thinking, I was inspired just to mention some metaphor of inclusion and integrity. We all know it's quite romantic, but of course we all know this image where there is a shark and there are small fishes scattered all over the sea. And on the next image, we see them organized, and then they can romantically defeat the shark. In the reality of fishes, it's quite impossible. But this brings us to an interesting metaphor in which we say that if we are isolated, if we are scattered, if we don't have a connection to each other, everything can happen to us. So the pandemic crisis is one of them. The financial crisis is another, and all the political instability of tomorrow, etc. If we organize, and this is the issue I would like to share, and some examples, some meta level examples, because in this 10 minutes intervention, I would be barely mentioning some very specific examples, but I would like to just attract all of you into some further reading, and I will be sharing some links down in the chat box to the reports that we have been developing. We are going to answer some very important questions which have been asked during this session. And Maciej mentioned, and thank you for this, that I'm also a coordinator to cultural department of the city of Wrocław, which has been a European capital of culture in 2016. And yes, and I will be unfortunately vanishing for the Cultural Congress, which is happening this week, and we have a panel discussion on 5 o'clock. But I decided to just, if you allow me, to just share with you one case which is not coming from rural areas, from urban areas, but it has got all what we are discussing about. So integrity, inclusion, and grassroots initiatives. So in the year 2016, when Wrocław was a European capital of culture, there were several new doors open. So this new knowledge, those insights, they were gathered in the strategic documents, and in that particular one main strategic documents, it was written that we should be having a civic advisory board for culture to the mayor of Wrocław. And historically on Friday, so in 2 days, we will be establishing it. But why this case is so important? We are doing this in reverse way to many boards established by mayors in many cities. So it's not the list of names that the mayor will just announce, but social representatives, 8 out of 15 members, are going to be elected in the general elections that we have opened to the whole city. We have 52 candidates that they just decided to be part of this social board for culture. And we have registered more than 4,400 voters. So it means that if we wanted to have this social board, we could not just then make it as a branch event. And this was a great discussion. Inclusion to which aspect? I mean, to which point? If we are going to have only a close meeting, a close congress, and the voters are going to be only from cultural practitioners or also a cultural receivers. So the audience was in the final decision in the regulations allowed to be voting. So this is just one apart concept that I wanted to share with you. And year 2016 was also very important because we have been organizing a regional platform to bring rurality into urbanity. And at that time, we have initiated a crowdsourced process of creating a manifesto on territorial development. And exactly this year, after 4 years' time, having a contribution from around 200 practitioners from Europe. So this is the link to being organized and then to act. We have gathered several aspects of recommendations on many levels, on many particular issues like education, accessibility, arts, of course, integrity, inclusion. And please allow me to share a link with you to our ENCC working group. ENCC, European Network of Cultural Centers, which was mentioned by Maciej, is organizing this working group. And within this working group, we have been developing this manifesto, which a direct link I will share with you as well. And this year, 2020 is very special to us because we have been finishing many ongoing participatory processes, not only the one that the ENCC established by itself, but also we have been organizing with the other European networks, mentioning, of course, Culture Action Europe, Trans-Europe Pulse, and IETM. And the same date, mid-March this year, just right before the pandemic crisis, and we were not able to create actual physical events, so we were having like an open webinar. We have been also launching a document called Beyond the Urban, Contemporary Arts and Culture as a Key to a Sustainable and Cohesive Europe. So this another link is coming to you, like a further reading. It's a policy paper with a rationale in which we all stand for, of course, intrinsic, autotelic value of culture and its importance in creating inclusive, full of integrity societies wherever we speak about. And we, of course, go beyond the European Union. We have several inputs from all over the actors that we have linked or they have linked with us. I would like to mention in this short presentation of mine also Voices of Culture, structured dialogue between the cultural sector and the European Commission. The first one, Voice of Culture, now it's called Voices. The first was Voice of Culture, happened in the year 2015 in Florence, and it was related to participatory governance of cultural heritage. We've been there as the NCC, and we've been there also recently for the gender equality, and this last report publication, a role of culture in non-urban areas of the European Union. We have been discussing among 35 organizations from all over Europe, from also very remote places, very far from the center, discussing decentralization, discussing depopulation, discussing over-tourism, and the role of culture in non-urban areas. What are the full recommendations? And also, please allow me to share in the chat box this link with you. You can find very many specific many specific examples there. But of course, we have to bear in mind that all the knowledge we have gathered inside, they are from pre-pandemic times. So among all the actors that have been involved in this report or with other European networks, we are discussing to be refreshing, reconnecting our peers and our members in order to ask them same and also different, because the context is different, questions in order to have an actual knowledge what their struggles are. So, and I will speak in a second about that. My pre-last example is also a very important publication made in cooperation with ITM by their series Fresh Perspectives, number 9. It's arts in the rural areas, published also this year. I'm sharing a link with you now, and this is a very interesting example because we have gathered around 150 testimonies from all over the continents. So it's a very global report slash artistic analysis on how also arts, directly contemporary performing arts, could be supporting social inclusion and integrity. So if you look inside this report, you will find very inspiring examples also from the countries which are struggling a lot, despite of pandemic that we didn't know at that time at all, but they are struggling from very big level of criminality, of financial almost surviving situation, or such a very dramatic climate and nature as the Nepal Film Festival, for example, organized among the top hills of this planet. But this is so inspiring that the people in several circumstances, and I'm relating to what Louis also said, that the values are similar. And this is quite amazing to observe how in a different circumstances, we see this initial curiosity, this initial willing to create a platform, an open space for gathering, and the culture is this incredible element, the bonding element, which is intrinsic, of course, but it's so useful in a sense that without culture, we are blind, most probably deaf, and completely in a fog. So the last, because my time is almost off, I'm sorry, but so I will not go into that details, but we have gathered several testimonies from cultural operators all around Europe about their current situation. And next week on our ENCC website, we will be also sharing a more elaborated report on that. Only to mention that, of course, the instability is such observed everywhere. Of course, this digital switch that we have been discussing during this panel, it's put contra digital divide, and many people are excluded. When the schools became only online, it showed also into which extent we have this problem in the society, but also the good aspect of COVID, if I may say so, is that we are speeding up in this digital switch, which I am personally not afraid of also. And I think that for many institutions, for many cultural operators, and for the audiences, it's good to be connected that way. But also, we are lacking a solidarity. It's so visible that the new solidarity is important. It's mentioned by so many peers that in crisis times, in many cases, we have been forgetting about this organizing and then acting. So we have to come back to this. And also the last maybe to say is that for the European networks, some peers are showing and expressing, and also our audiences are expressing the need for new ways of implementing, for example, cascading grants and micro granting, in order to bridge the gap between the locality, which sometimes it's not organizing a very small scale, tailor-made projects, and the European networks, in order to be having this representative democracy really ongoing, could be supporting the sector in that sense. So I'm in those times, which are full of difficulty, I'm very much looking forward with optimism that we will repuzzle and we'll find our way as humanity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Piotr. This is a great message, I would say, for yeah, and I'm very happy to hear your enthusiasm and also a number of materials you've shared with us. Together with the OECD, we'll also find a good way, I think, to share it with broad audiences and with all the participants of this event. I suggest now we go to Sigrid, because we still have one more presentation, and then we can also link to many of the topics that Piotr mentioned. We also have a number of questions in the meantime, so it's good to see that there's a lot of enthusiasm now. We'll continue tomorrow also some of the points we'll probably raise now. There's no way, of course, for all of us to be able to tackle everything. So now I'm very happy to give the floor to Sigrid Bosmans, and now we transported to Mechelen to hear her example. Sigrid, the screen is yours. Sigrid, I think you're muted. Sigrid?
I'm going to. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, yes.
Okay. I'm going to talk about a very particular local case in Mechelen. And I am Sigrid, and I would like to thank you for being able to take part in this very interesting dialogue. So Mechelen, this is the museum where I work for. It's a museum Hof van Buswijk. And Mechelen is a small city between Antwerp and Brussels, about 90,000 inhabitants. And I'm going to talk about the ground of things. And the ground of things, it means like ground, like soul in Dutch, but ground and foundation. So it has the two meanings. And the root of the project is to investigate if we can create a common world for the inhabitants of the city. So what connects those inhabitants? So, but it's a long process project, and it's very difficult to talk about it in 10 minutes. So I will focus on inclusive and participatory perspective. Now I'll go to the second dia, please. So here, so the idea is very simple, but it was not my idea. It was the idea of Willy Thomas. He is the artistic director of a theater, Theater Arsenal Water, a city theater in Mechelen as well. And so he has the idea to give 1 square meter of ground to every inhabitant in the city. And of course, with 1 square meter of ground, you can't do anything. So we need to, you need to collaborate and find ways to work together to do something with this 1 square meter of ground. And here you see a press conference where we want to reach as much as people as possible in the city to ask them to do some propositions for this 1 square meter of ground. Okay. So now I have, because it's a long-term project, I have some milestones in this project. And so it began at the end of 2017, beginning 2018. And there was directly an action from the city council, and they said, okay, we'll give 20,000 square meters to this project, which makes it tactile, because then you have real ground and you have to decide what you're going to do with it. So we started collecting proposals, and we ended it in February, and we had 206 proposals, which was already too much ground to do the things on the 20,000 square meters. And so we had to do a first selection, and we did this first selection with all the people who applied an idea. So, and then we reached 84 projects, and that we bring to the Neverending Park, which was a kind of exhibition place underneath a museum grounds. And we built a kind of park, and we used this park to work with all the people and all these ideas. And you see 3 different dates, because it was supposed to end 15 March, but it ended 13th of September because of COVID, of course. We had to close the exhibition. So, and now we're working on sessions with all the people who have settled their ideas and the ideas we were going to work on. Okay, and so the realization, we thought it was in we said it's to be 2021, but we already know that in the development of some of the projects, it won't be possible to end it in 2021, because some of the development projects still start in 23 or something like that. Okay. So now I'm going to look at the ideas of how we worked on inclusion and participation. And here's the interesting thing, because we also already thought about and heard about the outskirts of cities and the city centers and the usual suspects and things like that. So that was also our idea. We wouldn't want the usual suspects. We wanted we wanted to reach people everywhere. And this is a little caravan we built, and there was a tandem before it, and we cycled it to the outskirts of the city and put it down by flea markets and start talking to people about what would you do with 1 square meter and so on. We also did, we went to visit schools. We went to visit elderly homes, because mostly they don't ask people in elderly homes to think about the future of the city, but if you want inclusion, they should be included as well. We also went to talk to organizations where people in poverty took a stand, or in organizations that work with refugees and so on, and we did home visits. So it was a long trajectory collecting ideas with people. Yes. You can. Okay. And so if in doing so, of course, we had already a network as a museum. We work with the different target groups, and the theater as well. He worked with different target groups. So we had already a network of people to work with, but we wanted networks to work. And so we used our networks to talk to their networks and created like a whole network of networks and linking them together. For instance, what you see here is one of the people of the Lage Drempel, which is an organization where poor people take a stand. And we went to talk to them. And when we went to talk to them, they wouldn't go for the project, because they said, yes, everybody comes here and then they talk to us and they don't really listen. They go along and they just talk to us, and they can say, we did that. Okay. So we had to talk to them very regularly, and we took in an artist who was staying at the exhibition. And so at a moment, we thought, okay, what is it? The need of these people is that they feel that they are not heard. That was their real need. So we start talking about them with them about that. And so they decided that on their square meter, they wanted a pulpit so they could be heard. So, and the artist who was in the exhibition, she worked with these people, and she worked with them in trying to make them speak out what they wanted to say. And so they made a film with these people, and these people said what they wanted to say to the people in the exhibition. So that was one of the ways that we linked networks and made the networks work. So, and here you see the exhibition, you have a view on the exhibition. Often cultural spaces are seen as free spaces, spaces where people can speak free. But I think it's necessary to add an idea that is the safe space, because you don't only need a free space, you need a safe space to talk and to make people connect and interconnect. So we build a park beneath our in our exhibition space because of the idea of a park, central park that was created to make interactions possible with people who are not interacting in the city themselves. So that was the idea of creating a park with a forum and trees, and people just could come in and work in that space. And here you see the artworks of Benjamin Verdong. So we had this 84 project that went into the exhibition. So, but if people brought in ideas to us, they brought models and they brought drawings and they brought all kinds of things to show what they wanted to have on their square meter. And then you see that there's no equality in what people can do. They don't all have the great skills to draw a real great drawing of what they want to do, or have a great model. So we had an artist do them all the models. So they would have an equality on one side, but on the other side, also if people make models, they make it very specific. So you close the idea in doing so. And so we want to open the idea, and we by making of every proposition a little artwork, we opened the discussion again to talk about what is possible to work on together. And so in this exhibition space, we had artists in residence. So they were there and in their own way, and their own artistic way, they went talking to the people who visited the exhibition, but also they worked with all the people who put in an idea. And they tried to make them work together, or connect them to other people, or things like that. And so they reimagined with these people all the different proposals. And here you see, and I think it was interesting to hear that inclusion works like a way to try to connect to different opinions, because that's what we think was necessary. If you think about the safe space, we had all the different proposals in different teams, and we brought in experts, but not only the experts that are giving the voice that people would think of as the right voice to hear, but we also gave them the counter voice. So we also had debates on different points of view of the teams of the different proposals. And we also asked the eldermen to talk, the people themselves, the civil servants, and we always created kind of working spaces to bringing expertise and different kinds of view. So if you think about inclusion, it's also about giving voice to these counter voices. Deciding together. There were 2 times we had to decide. We had to decide when we went from 206 ideas to 84, which ideas we were going to take along, and we didn't want a kind of game where you could win a certain thing, but we wanted people to decide together. And then, so we asked all the people who submitted an idea to come and decide together. So we used deep democracy and we decided with 150 people together in one day. From the 206, we went to the 84 ideas. And now at the end, we decided which clusters we would go and negotiate with the city, and also how they would work together. So it is one of the main points is deciding together how you go about this way of working. So, and also in this inclusion idea, we started with dividing the different projects in teams that are the same. But then we thought, if you want to work on inclusion, maybe you should mingle ideas and communities. So that's what we did, and we worked with the people together to get there. And so, for instance, tuin van eten. So it's not translated. It means something like the garden of eating. And so we mixed the ideas, 16 ideas of inclusion with ideas of food strategy and ecology. So, for instance, you have people who want a city farm, and you have people who want diverse association house. How can they work together on a project? So creating inclusion by making communities work together. Do it in a mix. We thought about a lot of these projects. We have inhabitants of the city bringing in projects, but a lot of these projects are already at some level in the city. They are there because if we look at the priorities that the city council themselves set and the policy domains, you can see that every project fits into in a box. So that is already a project that is really embedded in city goals. And I think we end with this one. It's about working together, because now we have these working sessions where we put in these people, which is clusters around different clusters. We put in experts, we put in civil servants, and try to create this inclusion and participatory work by really working together, not just talking or act, but really working together to realize their ideas.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Sigrid, for this presentation. I hate to be a bad cop here, but of course, since we're getting close to an end. Yes, sorry.
I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me? Can the other speaker hear me? I think, Sigrid, it might be the problem of your, because I can hear you at least, yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, Sigrid, for this presentation. And now I'm leaving almost an impossible task to Pierluigi and Luis to actually comment on your both inspiring presentation. And there was also a number of questions specifically addressed to both of them. I hope that Luis and Pierluigi were able to see these questions. Also, a very specific issue that was flagged. So saying that we urgently need actually more inclusion in leadership positions in cultural institutions, in policy and other visible areas, such as, for instance, this webinar, in fact, which was placed. How would you comment to this? But again, in light of what we have just heard from Mehelen, but also the examples from Piotr on work carried out by different European networks on the topic of culture inclusion and then local level. I know you also know very well these networks, so you might have some thoughts here. I don't know which one of you would like to start. Luis or okay, Luis, please go ahead.
Okay, so the first thing is about this leadership issue. I think that what we need is to give the opportunity and to put together. So there is a training process with people coming from all kinds of communities and giving power to these people. So it's not just a quota issue, it is a process issue. And that is very important to be conscious on that and to design a strategy in order that step by step, these people could get more responsibility and can demonstrate their capacity to be in leadership positions. I think that this is the way to do things. In relation to one of the questions who was directly to me, and it is linked to this last presentation, it is this one about the relationship between equity and inequality. And I think that I talked before about the importance of rethink positive discrimination in a non-paternalistic way. And I think the best way to do that is having a clear criteria about how to do that. So the first issue is the goal have to be to allow them to be self-sufficient. That is the crucial issue. So if we want not to be paternalistic in this kind of position, so have to be, the criterion is temporality, so support for a period of time, giving tools, allowing to be self-sufficient. And another issue, which for me is also very important, is give value to the diversity of cultural assets. So we can believe about what is important and what is not important. But if we really believe on cultural diversity, the assets that for me are important maybe are not important for others. So we have to rebalance this. And the only way to do that is through dialogue, listening to others and giving power to the others.
Thank you very much, Luis. Now to you, Pierluigi.
Sure. Now, what I really liked about both case studies was this idea of taking participation seriously, which is something that is today more easily said than done. For example, I really appreciated this, let's say, step-by-step construction that in the Mechelen case emerged in some sense. This idea that you're, in some sense, creating the context for people to make their choices, to build their capabilities, but in a self-determined way. So more like, let's say, creating the setting rather than piloting the context. This, I think, is extremely important. Also, I mean, I was familiar with the work that all the Wrocław process also of creation of the program, the European Capital of Culture, all the complexities that it has, but also let's say, the legacy. For a city like Wrocław, this has been extremely interesting, and we have to remind ourselves that Wrocław is probably one of the cities that has changed nationality more often in the history of Europe. And this idea of really capitalizing on this, let's say, natural attitude to weave diversity into your own history shows very clearly from the approach that we saw. Also in terms of, you know, this idea of thinking new forms of cultural democracy, so to speak. So I think that examples like this are fantastic. What immediately feel is that, especially for projects like those that are so deeply accomplished, we should try to go beyond the anecdotal level. We need to construct serious case studies, more or less like people do in the business field. I mean, as you build case studies for business, why you should not do that for culture? And actually, we have a project on this that it would be interesting probably to discuss further. But these are clearly cases that should be brought one level up also in terms of simply of communicating in a rigorous way what they are doing, because I mean, the results are really impressive.
Thank you very much, Pierluigi. And I'm afraid we have to finish now because time is running out, and we are now standing between you and the most deserved break that you actually all deserve very much after following us for the entire day. Thank you very much, Luis, Pierluigi, Sigrid, and Piotr, who has already left for the other conference. And thank you very much to OECD colleagues for organizing. And it was a pleasure and honor for me to be able to moderate this session. We'll be starting tomorrow again at 10 in the morning with another deep dive, this time on cultural participation and education. I don't know if Katja, you want to say anything on behalf of OECD? Otherwise, it's all from me. I'm wishing you an excellent evening or rest of the day, depending from where you're connecting with us, and looking forward to the continuation of this project and this webinar tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you to all, and see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you.